Can I ask you something about the AIG bonuses that have caused such an uproar? I mean, why wasn't there strict regulations about how the stimulus money could be used, how the TARP could be used? Why wasn't there regulation here?
Well, if I was going to take the side of the government people, I'd say it's hard to write those regulations in a way that doesn't have unintended consequences. You know, there was a time when they tried to put limits on CEO pay, and it ended up leading to the explosion of stock options, which was not a good thing. But I think it basically comes down to the mindset. The view still apparently dominant, and even in this administration, is that there's nothing really fundamentally wrong with the system. There were some mistakes and there was some bad luck, but we don't want to shake up the system too much. We don't want to really rebuild it. We don't want to tear up the relationships. Those people who we thought were so smart and now look so dumb really are smart, and we want to keep them on the job. It's a problem. I think there's too much conventionality. To some extent, the Obama administration is still partying like it's 2006.
Paul Krugman, what would a new system look like? What would you advocate?
I think in the end, we're going to have to go back to something that is kind of like the system that emerged from the New Deal, which was tightly regulated banks and financial institutions, limits on risk-taking, fairly high taxes for high earners, which it turns out that low tax rates create incentives, but the incentives are actually to play dangerous games with other people's money. A lot of things need to be updated for the 21st century and information technology and so on, but basically our grandfathers got this thing right. Our grandfathers understood that finance is useful but dangerous and needs to be very tightly hedged about with regulations.
You write, the Obama administration has apparently made the judgment there would be public outcry if it announced a straightforward plan along these lines, which is, government buying up the troubled assets. So it's produced what Eve Smith calls a lot of bells and whistles to finesse the fact that the government wind up paying well above market value for, and you can't say the rest. I still can't say the rest, which was not Times style. But yeah, ultimately, when you get through the complexities and the salesmanship, this is just a complicated way of having the government pay, having you and me pay for buying these assets at more than any private investor is willing to pay for them. You talk about why you're so vehement about this right now, why you see this is the critical moment.
I think this is a political judgment. We can argue this back and forth. But I think that Obama doesn't get many shots at this, maybe just one. If there's already a huge public outcry, which doesn't distinguish between the things we need to do and the things that were just mistakes. And for Obama to go and do this plan and put a lot of taxpayer money on the line and for it not to work, which I'm almost certain is what would happen, I don't think he can come back to Congress for a plan that might actually work. I think that there's a real, the stimulus is something of the same thing. You have to do this right away because the political mood is getting ugly for good reason, and there's not a lot of patience with failed approaches, especially failed approaches that seem like your administration is just too close to Wall Street.
Paul Krugman, can you talk about the role of foreign sovereign wealth funds and explain what they are?
Oh, yeah, it's just when a foreign government has a bunch of money, which it is investing in the United States or in other countries, and as opposed to this is when you do something beyond just plain parking lots of money in bank deposits or U.S. government debt, which is where most of the foreign money is. I think that's a much exaggerated issue. It's these are governments playing with large sums of money. At least so far, all the evidence is that they've been really pretty dumb investors. The Chinese appear to have given us a substantial a subsidy by buying a lot of stocks at the top of the market and losing them. So I don't think it's a central issue.
And this issue of counterparties, a word we're just learning right now, that AIG gets all of these billions of dollars and they use some of it to pass through to banks to entities like Goldman Sachs, to UBS, which had to pay a massive fine to the U.S. government, so we're paying their fine for violating us?
Well, this is the counterparties. Basically, think of the financial system is this web of connections, and the reason that we're stepping in to rescue these companies in the first place is that we're afraid that if you break the web at one point, it unravels across a pretty wide range. And that's not just a theory. When Lehman Brothers was allowed to fail, in fact, a huge gaping hole opened up across the financial system. So this is the reason that we're rescuing them in the first place. Now, the only thing you can say is that if we're going to be doing this, then we do need to look hard at who else we're rescuing, and we need to say, look, you guys have to make some sacrifices as part of this as well. And what we're seeing right now is that it's basically all free money from the taxpayer with no quid pro quo, and that gets to the heart of the dispute over what our policy is right now.
Finally, Paul Krugman, has this made you reevaluate your support of NAFTA, the whole push for sort of unregulated globalization, why so many people took to the streets in the Battle of Seattle, for example? Yeah,
the answer is no. There's a huge distinction between letting actual trade in goods, stuff, real physical stuff proceed, which is terribly important to the poorest countries above all. When somebody asks, why am I in favor of more or less free trade? My answer is I'm really thinking about countries like Bangladesh, which literally are only able to keep their heads above water by their ability to sell labor-intensive stuff thanks to their low wages. It's really critical. I've never been a fan of unregulated movement of capital internationally. This was a big fight back in the late 90s between some of us who say, we need to regulate, we need to limit this stuff, and people who said, oh, no, you have to trust the markets. And it's the hot money that's the issue here. It's not the auto parts from Mexico. That's a different discussion. It's the hot money from all over the world that is the crisis right now.
And the UN panel that will next week recommend the world ditch the dollar as its reserve currency in favor of a shared basket of currencies?
There have been millions of plans. Well, I'm exaggerating, but there have been many plans along those lines. That's not a decision that can be taken by an international body. The dollar is the reserve currency because people think it's the safest place to park their money. The euro is a natural competitor, except that the Europeans are as messed up in their policies as we are, if not more so right now. But the way to deal with that is not to have somebody agree that we're going to do something different, but to simply have the world have the natural competitors to the dollar make themselves worthy of the competition.
Paul Krugman, I want to thank you for being with us, Nobel Prize-winning economist, professor of economics at Princeton University, and columnist with the New York Times. His latest book is called The Return of Depression Economics and the Crisis of 2008. Thanks so much for joining us. He joined us from New Jersey.